All right, welcome to another edition of Reptile Fight Club. I am your host this evening. My name is Justin Julander. With me, as always, is Mr. Bob Rock. Rob Stone, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Super excited. This is good. Wave to the people. Blow them kisses.
Exactly. Oh, I've got this just kind of lingering cold that's just so yeah, I've still got that nice silky smooth Phil Wolf voice. So my daughter just went to the doctor because she has the same kind of thing, just this long kind of underlying thing that pops up. Usually when I exercise or something, it gets worse, and she's just started college, so she's probably has some stress that's popping it up. But they said she had some kind of like infection or something. They gave her steroids to try to kick it. So I'm like, man, maybe I should go in too.
Right.
Yeah. But what do you do? I think I joined a water polo club today. So there was one up on campus, and I was thinking, I'm not a student, but it'd be fun to get in and play water polo again. So I went up there, and they're like, oh yeah, we have like a master's team, you can come play with us. And I'm like, oh, cool. So
that'll be cool.
I think I'm going to try to play water polo again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Should be fun.
That's a real workout, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a little beat. I jumped in for about, 45 minutes today with them, and I'm like, oh man, I'm old. My shoulders all sore from throwing the ball and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm not a 21-year-old anymore.
Right. Well, there you go.
Yeah. So should be fun though. What's going on with you?
Oh, not too much. Just, well, I suppose a lot of nothing simultaneously, right? Just seemingly super busy, but nothing of real interest. I guess from a herp perspective, I finally, Carpet Fest coming up in a couple weeks, so that's exciting. I was looking, as I'm now want to do, right? I was looking heavily into sort of Jersey herping spots again, all the spots that have disappointed us in the past, additional spots as well. Yeah. And I talked to Mike Curtin quite a bit, and he's certainly on the case, and he'll get out there with us for a day at least.
Oh, cool.
So that'll be cool.
Same area as last year? Or
same areas that we've been, but I think, well, I don't know what Mike has up his sleeve. So I said, he'll be leading the tour wherever he thinks appropriate on the day, that first day with him. And then otherwise, I think it'll be the spots that we've been to before. And those are the spots. It's just, it's just tough herping.
Yeah. What's your main target?
Pine snake, eastern hognose, corn snake, and it's sort of in these, similar to Florida, it just really strikes me as being the sort of place where the density is super low. Odds of seeing stuff is relatively low. I think Kaufeld even talks about that in the book. There's some line in there about like, you'll get skunked a lot, but basically anything you find is going to be a worthwhile find.
Sure.
And probably beyond worm snakes and garter snakes or whatever, anything other than that, which even then, better to see those than to see nothing. But, I think that's just sort of how it is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's nice to walk through the pine barrens. It's kind of aside from the little creepy crawlies, but the ticks are not enjoyable. That was a rough time, having all those welds. So I don't know. I'm curious if you're going to try to prevent those this time, get some bug spray or wear long pants or, what's.
Well, I will. So I am now team long pants. So there you go. That's all right.
We've converted you.
I think so. I think really it was the Southern California nasty cactus situation. That was the first time I had transitioned to that. And it definitely made a huge difference in terms of what my legs looked like on the back end. So I'm game for that. Yes, long pant. And then Mike, when we were talking, made mention, he suggested, a heavy permethrin spray for pants and gear and stuff like that. And he even included the comment of that I should know that if he is suggesting it as imperative, then I guess demanding it as imperative or whatever, that I should take it seriously. He said that it's pretty gnarly this year, just seemingly like it is every year or whatever. So maybe you won't be missing that.
Oh yeah, that's I won't be scratching welts for another several months, but yeah, that was incredible. The
Yeah.
the diversity and the number and oh man, yeah,
Parasites.
insane, yeah. But I mean, we found a lot of good snakes. That was a really cool trip. So I wish I could make it this year. That would
Yeah.
be fantastic, but I had to go and book an extra week in Northern Territory
Right.
to go
Yeah.
play around in the Kimberley after you guys leave. So we'll see how it works. But
Yeah. Which, heck, I think you'll be the one with the last laugh for sure. So,
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. It looks like maybe there's just not a lot of people that go over there, but the area I'm looking at, it doesn't have a ton of records, so I don't know if it's just because people aren't going there and recording, observations on INAT or what. But I mean, there's a few, of course, but anything I see is going to be pretty cool.
yeah, it's all cool stuff.
Anything's going to be neat, but
are you thinking like Connemara and the lake that's over that way and all that sort of stuff?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lake Argyle, I believe it is. And I mean, it's a big lake, and I don't, I'm trying to formulate a plan to try to figure out, what to do. And, if any, my Australian buddies are listening and want to go herp with me, they're welcome to join me. Cause otherwise I think I'm just going to be a loner out there, looking on my own. So, but I want to have a good plan. So at least Heidi can know where I am in case I don't, check in, so that's always the, fun of it, I guess, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be an adventure either way.
Yeah. And I don't think I announced it here yet, but I got a ticket for Australia in the spring. So going back again. So I'm headed to Central Australia for my 50th. So I don't know.
We're trying to see if we can have a crew to join you and stuff. Need to look into it and figure out, again, probably not the full window, but got to give you your alone time as well, Yeah,
so. Yeah, exactly. I got to come to peace with turning 50. So if I make it that far, I guess we'll see. Maybe this little underlying infection will take me out before I get to there, but all things are looking like I'll probably survive it. So
you probably pull through. Okay.
Probably pull through. Yep. But hey, nothing's guaranteed, right? So
absolutely
I'll make the best of what I've got, and we'll have a good time. So yeah, excuse me. Oh man, my office at work has been like an ice box, and I've got a few lizards there, and they're just kind of like,
languishing in it.
Is this the winter cool down already? And I mean, it gets pretty warm outside, but I don't know. They just keep cranking the AC while the temperatures have gone down. I don't know if you've had a cold snap the last week, but it's getting down into the 40s at night.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
No.
So yeah, it's been kind of a break from we've had a pretty hot summer, so it's been kind of nice from that aspect. But yeah, the lizards are not enjoying that. So I think I'm going to bring them home and have them go in the reptile room just to get them some warmth, and then there's a ready supply of crickets there. I really want those spiny tails to grow and do well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They grow pretty quick. I'm pretty sure there's a male in there. I'm hoping they're not both males because, at one point it looked like I had one male, one female, but we'll see. It's always hard until
no sneakers. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, they can develop at different rates, and, you're like, oh, I've got a female. Oh no, there comes some mammy beans. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. And I'm not sure if I need to look into this a little more, but yeah, if the Ciliaris, if the males will be not happy with each other in the same cage, or if raising them up from, juveniles is going to overcome that or what. So I guess I'll keep a closer eye on that as they get a little bigger. I'll take a closer look when I move them back to the house and see how they're doing. But yeah, they're really cool. I'm really enjoying them, and it's been fun to have them in the office because I can sit and watch them or something, thinking or whatever. I'm sitting on my computer. So it's nice to look up and have those guys looking back at me. They can hide so well. And, it's like half the time I'm searching for them, trying to figure out where they are. Yeah. I've got a pretty heavy, like stick load in there. I went and found a bunch of these thin, wiry, branchy stuff, and like old, I don't know if it's like sagebrush skeletons or what, but it's pretty nice for them because there's a lot of different places to hide, a lot of different layers and stuff. So
nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know, and it's probably just in terms of the room, like in a room space, whether we'd actually be able to see it, right, to be getting this intel. But I do wonder if lizards, if there is some functionality where it's like mice, right, where if it's two males alone and there are no females, conspecifics or even something similar, if they could cohabit in a way that they couldn't if there were either females in the cage with them or even just in that same room, kind of we see differential responses in mice, in those circumstances. So that's sort of interesting.
Or if one being a male and developing quicker will kind of prolong the development of the other one, and if they'll kind of look like a twin or longer or something. So it's hard to tell, but I might have to split them up a little bit and see just to make sure. But
fair enough. Have you seen those in the NT?
Yeah.
Did
you guys not? You've seen them, right?
We did.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one night where they were just like the guys kept getting mad at me because I kept stopping for them. I'm like, these are so cool, you guys. There's not much else going on, so we might as well stop and look at geckos. We did 2 nights on Dorat.
Yeah.
One night was crazy. Everything was moving. And then the other night, it's like we saw a couple spiny tails and like a DOR frilled, and that was about it. It was pretty slow. But then I do remember there was a pretty big moon out that night. So, we didn't plan it.
Yeah. Well, how's your birthday bash relative to the moon?
Oh,
you factor that in? What'd you do with that?
You know what? That just crossed my mind right as I said that. It'll be the later in the month, so probably just as the new moon's coming on, and I think the late, like if you go a week past the full moon,
that's the ideal time from my perspective. That's sort of that last quarter into new is mostly a big appeal of that is the moon often doesn't even rise until after we'll be basically done for the night, especially Australia where the sun goes down so early. Yeah,
like 6 p.m.
It's wild.
Yeah. So that was not great.
That was a shock on the first trip.
Right? Exactly. So we'll I'm sure even if there's a moon, we'll
it'll probably be okay.
A good trip. But I'm sure you guys will wait your time on the not moon cycle if the less moon if you can do it. So
I think I don't know. I'm curious your thought on this. Kind of in a trip context like this, I just feel like it's better to be on the front end than the back end, because it's one thing if kind of, we had to leave and then you go on to kind of our own find, awesome things or whatever. If we come on the back end and you've just had a week of, finding all this great stuff and you have the exhaustion of having put in that time, that maybe there's more of a mismatch between the things. Whereas, if kind of the whole group starts on the front and then maybe stragglers on the back, that maybe there's more, maybe that's more conducive than, you've already been out for a week. You've been wearing, burning the candle at both ends. You're always so high energy that I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem of like, you guys want to go again tonight, or whatever. But like, it's probably, I would think that maybe the front end looks better, even regardless of the moon.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, and a lot of my targets in Central Australia in the spring are diurnal. So varanids and blue tongues and molochs and stuff like that, And I think even like the Brettles that Casey found was in the daytime. So, you never know when you're going to stumble across your highest goals or your biggest targets.
Right.
So, we'll keep an eye out whenever. What killed me is on my first trip, we were in Alice and we stayed in Simpson's Gap a lot. And we were there and it was like the wettest year on record. So it like rained pretty much every day. And the few days that it was sunny, we saw some cool stuff, but then, mostly it was just kind of rained out and not the best time. But, I got back and a couple weeks later, somebody was posting, "Oh, here's a huge parenti we found at the mouth of Simpson's Gap." I'm like, dang it. He lived right there. He was just hiding out while it was rainy. So, thinking about how many times I could have seen that animal, just going in and out of that canyon.
Yeah. So that's your only trip there? So you made the one, right? You haven't been to that area otherwise?
No. So I have a kind of a rough, idea of where I want to be and where the cool places are to look, and at least, for scenery or hikes or whatever, So, and there's, I guess trying to plan it out, that's always the challenge, as like how many days do you plan to walk gorges at night looking for brettles when, if you find one on the first night, do you keep walking gorges or do you move on or go somewhere else? So the plan can change, and you guess you got to have B plans and C plans to, or at least discuss that with the others and, spend more time looking for other stuff, for other places. So hopefully that happens. We find a brettle the first night,
there are way worse problems than that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I think, if we can get a handful of people there, then, more eyes, the better, of course. And it'll be a fun time. So.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. I got that book that you had purchased, the Snake Dance of the Hopi, and I need to dig into that. I haven't dug into that yet, but my aunt and uncle just published a book on my grandfather, and he was sorry, I guess for the listener, I'm talking to Rob now, but when we went on our trip, we went down and found Hopi rattlesnakes, and so we got to talking about the Hopi. And my grandfather had been adopted, into the Hopi tribe in the Cloud Clan. And so we were talking a little bit about that. And then Nipper had sent Rob a book, right? On
that one.
The Snake Dance. Yeah. So Rob showed me that. I'm like, I've never heard of that. So I went and purchased it as well. Because that's the thing that's always intrigued me the most about the Hopi is the snake dance, of course, because they will do a ceremonial dance where they dance with live rattlesnakes in their mouths. Like they hold them with their mouths while they do their dance. And they have somebody there kind of on the side, distracting the snake and trying to keep them from getting bit. But pretty impressive, pretty crazy, so like what an amazing thing that is. So I've always been fascinated by that, and I actually found a Hopi rattlesnake on the Hopi reservation several years back. But the what's also interesting is they kind of go far and wide to collect the snakes for the dance. And then I think they release them off the mesa in one spot. So they're like, you wonder how much mixing and matching, like if they're bringing, Grand Canyon rattlesnakes or prairie rattlesnakes or whatever, and bring them all in. So kind of an interesting thought. Yeah. Concolor. And man, that would be a brave person to dance with a concolor. Yeah. But you wonder if they go south and grab, some black rattlesnakes or some diamondbacks or something. So yeah, it's hard to say. I was trying to ID them from some of the old photos. I mean, they didn't allow, once photography became commonplace, they stopped allowing any photography on the mesas. And so like you couldn't go up there and take pictures. So there's not a lot of newer, footage. And I believe that the snake dance has gone out. Like nobody has taken that on because the ceremonies are passed from uncle to nephew. And so if no nephews want to learn it from the uncles and carry on the traditions, then they just disappear. And I believe the snake dance is one of those casualties. So it's kind of unfortunate. It's sad to see cultures die out like that. But I guess now we have our, piped in water. We don't need to do a snake dance anymore. But yeah, I mean, they've been a stable civilization for 1,000 years. And, the United States of America is going on, a couple hundred. So yeah, I think I might side with what's worked for 1,000 years.
Right.
But what do you do?
Well,
All
and
right.
most of those Hopi rattlesnakes, for clarity, that we saw on the trip were pretty aggressive, right? Like
Yeah.
of all the
Yeah.
things to be putting in your mouth, I guess you're talking about, oh, well, finding different things or whatever. But like,
Mhm.
certainly, there are things that are more, in general, right, amped up than others. And
Mhm. Yeah, I'd much
I,
prefer to put a Gray Basin rattlesnake in my
uh,
mouth than a Hopi.
right, at
Yeah.
least the average one,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah,
At least based on our sample size. So.
exactly. Now, did we ever figure out if those two on Canyonlands were
So I think the second one, the
the
larger
larger
one,
one?
was a Hopi. Either a
Yeah,
prairie.
for sure.
To me again, it's a
Yeah,
four corners prairie is what that would be.
none
Just
tis.
because they're not, there it's that isolated pocket. There's no
Yep.
differentiation in the population. So,
Yeah.
the first one to me, that real distinct blotching with that fading, I think it's concolor. I suppose there might be, if you went back in its lineage, if you would say, okay, it's right on there. What I would say is that when Phil and I were on our most recent trip, and we were chatting with Kyle Vargas, the spot where that came from, or at least very close to there, a place that we went that was even closer than kind of the far extent,
Mhm.
was a place that he had highlighted as like his absolute favorite place to find concolor.
Really?
So we're talking about a stone's throw from
Yeah.
that area. So
Yeah.
again, to me, and maybe it speaks more to the actual differentiation or lack thereof amongst these forms
Mhm.
than it is anything else. To me, that first one, at least
Yeah.
there's some concolor at a minimum, there's concolor in there.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know what it is, and certainly we saw that third one up northeast a town. So those, I think, basically relative to lists, to the extent that that's the question, right?
Mhm.
I have it the same status that I have for the eastern coral snake, where that I saw but wasn't able to get a photo of. Kind of, I have them as checked as I've definitively seen them.
Yeah.
But that I would want to have a new photo if we're going to put together a book of all the venomous reptiles of the United States,
Sure.
all photos taken by me or whatever,
Mhm.
to say, I think I'd want a new photo for that.
Yeah.
Is basically where I'm at. Our one from northeast of town, I would say, that thing certainly really tried to put a tooth into a finger.
Yeah.
And, so the idea would be like, okay, so if I wasn't sufficiently cautious, I would be like, well, I mean, theoretically, I've never seen a live concolor if you don't take these two, but I'm still in the hospital with getting antivenom. And
Yeah.
I
Right.
know that
Yeah.
people get bit by they'll decapitate a snake and get bit but
Sure.
that's not what we were talking about.
No. Yeah.
Fully charged and put a
And
tooth in. It's like
injured. Yeah.
absolutely. So
Mhm.
to me, I've definitively seen him. We've all definitively seen him either way. But I just count it as wanting to get a new photo to the
Yeah.
extent to have it be definitive. I still think that first one and maybe that third one that we didn't stop for that was similarly sized. I think
Mhm.
those are concolor, or at least there's concolor in there. But
Yeah.
I do take that the second one, is probably a four corners prairie.
Yeah. And I mean, it wouldn't be a hard trip to meet up by that reservoir on the border of Utah, Wyoming.
Absolutely.
I mean, probably a
we
4 or
we can
5
knock
hour
that one out.
drive or something, we could
It's
do a
not too bad.
weekend there and find them up there, but
where
that'd be
there's
something.
nobody giving you questions, which
Yeah.
the funny thing to me, is that was exactly my entire point relative to Abyssus,
Mhm.
to the extent that's the thing, right? It was
Yeah.
like, sure, we could spend all that time. There's a whole range where you could potentially see them with much substantially less effort that we put in, right?
Yeah.
But then we'd just be having the same conversation, and
Yeah.
certainly the peanut gallery would be having those same, I promise, and it was like, I'm not engaging in that conversation. I'm not going to waste my time looking
Yeah.
up there, right? We're going to the place where it's that or nothing.
Yeah, it's always hard when you're, posting something and you're like, this is this. And then somebody's like, well, are you sure about that? It's kind of a tricky thing. So, and I mean, anytime you're herping on kind of the border or the range where two different forms overlap,
or
and
that
who
spot where
knows?
it's really, there's three, maybe,
Right?
there's like three different things happening kind of simultaneously there to me. So at least within that county, if you
Yeah.
maybe not in the same spot, but within that's a big county within that county. So yeah, I'm with you. And I'm so generous and tolerant of people on the internet who have their opinions and are, share them, didn't share them.
Yeah.
I'm always very tolerant about
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody welcomes that, you don't know what you're talking about. That's
Oh,
what
thank you for
that's.
telling me. Thank
Oh,
you.
for sure because
Yeah,
you've seen a
absolutely.
couple before. I don't know. I mean,
I always take it well.
yeah, yeah. I had to run him by Louis Porras. See if he has some insight into that. I need to contact him anyway, see how he's doing. But yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. There's the herp room's running steady and sending snakes out, and things are moving. So yeah, I can't complain about the reptiles, and they're doing well and just kind of chugging along. But I've been a little preoccupied with that milling the timber that I pulled out
Yeah.
of Monroe
How'd that
Mountain.
trip
So
go?
it went pretty well. Yeah, we got a lot of wood. But it gave me a reason to buy a planer and get figure out how to get everything straight and nice and lined up and everything. So, and then, yeah, it's looking really nice though. I think it should be a pretty cool project. I bought some, epoxy resin or acrylic resin, I guess, and have been pouring that into, knot holes and stuff like that. And has kind of like a little blue coloration to it. And
Oh, that's cool.
put in some glow in the dark powder. So it just is kind of a test to see. So then when we turn off the lights, the ceiling might have a little glowy effect to it. We'll see how that works. But so I don't know. It should be a fun project, but it takes a lot of time. And, I've got a lot of sawdust in places I didn't think I could get sawdust in. So
my bus pass.
Yeah, exactly. The nook is okay, but the cranny, oh, there goes the nook. So yeah, it's been an adventure, but yeah, I'm excited, for the finished product when I can have a piece of Monroe Mountain up on my ceiling.
Yeah,
That'll be pretty cool. And the wood, it's beautiful with that kind of blue grain through it. And so I'm pretty excited to see how that goes.
So you caught a couple flats though on the way? Did I remember that right?
Yeah, I was driving up the mountain and got a flat tire. And then, this is how cool my cousins are. So the cousin that has the sawmill up on Monroe, he drove down and picked us up. He had us drive our car to that park where we herped.
Okay. Yeah,
and
sure.
So we parked in that same parking lot there. And then, so we just left our car there, rode up with my cousin. The next morning, his brother came up and got my keys, went down, got the tire out of the car, took it to Big O, got me a new tire, brought it back, and so it was ready to go once we got down, just great cousins. And then when we were waiting for my cousin, he called his sister and said, "Oh, your uncle and cousin are in the parking lot, if you want to go visit with them." So she drove out and her husband came out. And so we got to see them. So yeah, it was kind of a nice little family reunion with my cousins. And I didn't know them as well as some of the other cousins because their mom was killed. My aunt, who is, my dad's sister, got killed in a train accident when, after she had her 6 kids. And so I never got to meet her. She died, shortly before I was born. But yeah, it's kind of a tragic thing. And so they would always go with their dad's family for the most part because they didn't have as many ties. But now that they're all older and have their own families, they'll come to the Jewland reunions and stuff. So it's been really cool to get to know them. And one of the first big trips that I got to know them on was the trip down to the Hopi Reservation. So
cool.
we went down there and stayed at Bluebird Springs, where the man who adopted my grandpa was from, and stayed on the land there and for a few nights. And it was pretty cool because my grandpa worked on the Kaibab forest. And so we found this little cave where they had put their offerings. And one of the, they had some deer skulls in there with the antlers, and one of the antlers still had a tag on it from the Kaibab forest. And so it's kind of cool. And I was just reading my grandpa's journal that or memoirs, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. And he tells the story about how he got to know the Hopis, and his work in Kanab and on the Kaibab and stuff, and talking about all the
Very cool.
cool things that happen there. And yeah, it's pretty neat. So I just got through those chapters of Kanab and Kaibab.
Yeah.
So pretty fun.
Very cool.
But what a neat place. I mean, that was really neat for me, and on this last trip, and to get into the Kaibab and go down the north rim of the Grand Canyon with you guys. That was fun to get back in there and see Kanab. If I would have known kind of some of the things, like, for example, my grandfather had shot this huge deer with, this giant antler spread, and it's apparently he's mounted in the ranger station down.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we could have stopped by the ranger station and seen the deer that my grandpa got, or something, something like that would have been kind of cool. And in town, he was, a legend for a long time. So I was curious if anybody had heard of him, if anybody still remembered him down there, because I'm sure Kanab has changed quite a bit since the 1930s when he lived there, and he was there during the Great Depression and did a lot of scouting, and so he led a lot of scout troops and stuff. And so, I'm sure a lot of the men in town would maybe remember him if they stuck around. So kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool.
It's nice to tie those family ties into herp trips, It's kind of cool. But now I have a reason to go back down there and see some of these things. So it's kind of fun. Well, maybe enough of this, my reminiscing nonsense. Maybe fight about a herp topic. Well, our old good friend Keith McPeak suggested this topic, and so I thought, let's get Keith on here. But he was a little microphone shy. He didn't want to come on. He said we'd do a better job. Now I fully disagree with that, but I didn't want to twist his arm too much. But yeah. So we'll miss you this time, Keith, but next time you'll have to come on. So we appreciate the suggestion, though. But he was kind of talking, about whether or not somebody that breeds something in an outdoor enclosure, especially if they, have access to the food and stuff outside, or, if you're not really having to do much, if you can really say, I bred these, or if you're just saying, I farmed these, or, that kind of thing. It is keeping outdoors similar to like farm bred rather than captive bred and born. Is there a distinction between keeping outdoors and keeping indoors in that regard? So I don't know. Does that sound like a fun topic to discuss?
I mean, sure. This feels like, yet another function either that we've talked to Ron about, or that Ron would certainly have a voice on, but we can bandy it about. I have an instant sort of thought, but that I would think would be a kind of a critical dichotomy from my perspective, but maybe you will agree or disagree. So we might as well chat through it a little bit.
Sounds good. Should we flip a coin?
Sure.
We can defend farming is captive breeding, or vice versa. So go ahead and call the coin toss there.
Tails.
Your luck has faded this week. It's heads. So all right. Cool. Let's see. I guess maybe I'll defend outdoor keeping and just kind of take that, be the proponent of outdoor keeping is captive breeding and such. So if that works for you.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay.
Let me think. Hold on. I need to process through this in terms of what I would.
How do you phrase things?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I can go first, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, maybe just to promote the conversation. The thing that I want to say that I think is sort of the critical distinction, and then we can work from there, but how about you go ahead and then.
Well, I mean, if you're ready to state that, we could start off with that too,
Sure.
Or do you think it'd be fit better later on?
No, I think it's fair. I think it's the important, really, maybe it's even definitional to the sort of argument. So I suppose it's fair to throw it out. Would be if we're talking specifically in situ, then I would think that, yeah, certainly that's what we're talking. We picture it right with the Indonesia is what comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about
Mhm.
farm bred animals in Indonesia, and especially if we're talking about, I mean, some of that stuff really looks like sort of 1930s birdcage style on top of
Mhm.
concrete, pilings or whatever, with maybe a fixture in there. If we're talking about something that then is native to Jakarta or Sumatra, that exact condition in those, that same space,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think that's farming, right? Necessarily. If we're talking about something that isn't actually tied to that space, meaning even chondros in that are over, in New Guinea,
Yeah.
as a, New Guinea and Australia, as opposed to being in Jakarta, to me, so there's probably equatorial similarity for
Mhm.
most of those things. I don't know what the elevational similarity is, but I think, right, chondros are lower, generally speaking, in New Guinea.
Yeah.
Um, so that there's probably some similarity there. It's probably not that as dissimilar as it could be, but I guess I'm just presenting it as it's a sliding scale of like,
Sure.
sure, Keith, breeding black rat snakes outside in in northern New Jersey is different than Keith breeding, to my mind, even pine snakes that are from further south in New Jersey and further to the south in the United States. Those would be two different. Those are probably two different things to me.
Mhm.
Let alone then saying, okay, is breeding heath monitors or something in northern New
Mhm.
Jersey. That's
Yeah.
those. That's the continuum, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I would say, looking at these, like you said, the bird cages in a battery of cement blocks or whatever, that's pretty far from natural. Now, the environmental conditions, the heat, the sun, the rain or whatever, probably matches pretty well what they're used to. And I think that's kind of what we strive for in our herp rooms as well. We want to
Sure.
find those elements that are critical to keep them happy so they lay eggs. So, and I think keeping outside doesn't necessarily guarantee. I just think about Frank Reedus, and he was he kept some Odatria, some of the smaller monitors outside, and he said they turned into a different animal. Like they were always worried about predators. They weren't as reliable in breeding. They took longer to and that kind of thing. And he said indoors it was a much more controlled environment because you could just give them heat. He found those critical needs of heat and food to be kind of the main factors that you needed to kind of pump them out for lack of a better term there. So I guess I still see a lot of work going into, and that's kind of the aspect, right? Like I guess I would see maybe more farming would be like having a big area and just going through and collecting gravid females and waiting for them to lay and then putting them back out. They're eating wild food. They're, doing
Yeah.
their own thing in the nature. And, like a lot of the ball pythons, they would just pull in gravid females, let them lay their eggs and then throw them back out. Sometimes weak and
Right.
emaciated state, and they might get eaten by something, and who
See
knows
how.
if they put them back where they found them, that kind of thing. So
Right.
I think like you said, there's a sliding scale and there's a lot of different aspects to this that I think we've discussed some of them before. But I mean, first off, I don't think putting something outside is necessarily like going to be better in all cases, and you might have to work harder outside than you would inside, even though you have maybe free light and free heat, that kind of thing. But as Ron said, if you put the cages in the wrong spot in your yard, you might have a giant tree shading them for, the important part of the year when you need the sun to shine on
Right.
them. So, that I think there is that sliding scale. I'll just state that, I guess, up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about keeping outside to me, and I don't know that this goes to my point, but the thing that I know both Frank, Ron, Bert talked about a lot are the sort of externalities that absent real problems shouldn't be a problem inside in terms of
Yeah.
sort of predation from other wild animals, right? Either native or introduced. and that sort of interactivity with the environment is something that we can control a lot more inside the house than outside, right? A raccoon is probably not going to break into your herp room and start, ripping open cages, whereas it's only the quality of your chicken wire outside potentially.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, Alan Herpetoculture learned that the hard way. He had a bunch of Shinosaurus and a raccoon got in and bit the head off of every one of them, like just killed them, like not eating them. They weren't just gone. They were all decapitated lying in the cage. Like what a frustrating thing. Right after he sank a lot of money into, the project and caging and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, it's gone in one night of a raccoon's murderous rage.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of thing where it's actually, I think when we see success stories, particularly in herps and things, so much of it is the long time scale. And it is really about it's the ability to be resilient through something like that, let alone many somethings like that really are the testament to the people that have success, in the long run. And maybe I guess that's where I would say there is some farming aspect to it, and maybe it's not negative, right? It's not pejorative to say that it's farming, is that both reptiles and the sort of things that go into it, like if people have rodents or what, all those sorts of things, it's really the culmination of each day's work that turns into a season, and it's the culmination of many seasons that turn into a breeding project or program, and then it's the culmination of all those different projects over decades that turn into making people legends within the community.
Sure. Yeah,
it's that's the people that we're really talking about, and it's the I think maybe, I don't know, I've just always been impressed by the ability to show up every day. And that's really what it takes. And it's not the flashy. It's like if someone comes on super hot and heavy and is super flashy, and that's it, kind of flash over substance, right?
Yeah.
We can see that in the sense that it's like, okay, well, let's check in 5 years.
Yeah.
If you give somebody that reaction, okay, how impressed am I? Well, we'll check in 5 years and see if you're still even like reptiles, and that's sort of a barometer for entry or for, respect in some ways. That's not to say, whatever. It's just my own standard kind of at this point is saying hey, let's work on these timescales, because our timescales are still so short compared to reptiles. We'll talk about it and say we're saying, oh, these things are basically the same. They're only 2 billion years of genetic, difference divergent. Right. And it's and we'll say, oh, that's not enough to call that a different thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I lost my train of thought there. I was,
I got pretty far afield on you, so I apologize for that.
No, that's all good. But I think that, when I think about farming and, true farming, I think about, like cattle ranching or cattle farming, where they turn them out on the mountain and then they round them up and bring them back in. And, some will have had calves and things like that. And then they'll finish them in a, like a
stockyard or whatever.
Stockyard. Sure. Yep. And, they'll have losses, they'll have gains, but, like if you're a good cattle rancher. Now, that isn't to say that they're working with, wild type animals. Right. Like these are selectively bred for, hundreds and thousands of years, maybe. And domestication of livestock is a pretty interesting thing. And with, working at an agricultural institution and having, being in the animal, dairy, and veterinary sciences department, I hear a lot of talk about, the best kind of diet to give them and nutrition and what kind of supplements and how to keep them out of poisonous plants and, that kind of thing. So it's really an interesting, I've learned a lot more than farming than I thought I would as a virologist, and that kind of thing. So, but to think that, we're just kind of letting nature take its course, or, no, we're giving them their best leg up, and we're putting a lot of energy into this. So maybe from that aspect, you could maybe say keeping them outdoors is akin to farming, but I don't know. I think a lot of people still have to put a lot of food and, feed them and put a lot of time and energy into that aspect of it. One other example I can think of where the species do a little better outdoors than indoors, at least this was the case down in Southern California. But one of my friends keeps a gurney outside and says that he has better success keeping them outside versus inside, which is, interesting. He says they breed more frequently, in regards to having maybe a few clutches a year, 2 clutches a year, something like that, litters a year, I guess I should say, not clutches. But so, I think there are some species that would definitely benefit from living outside. And maybe, obviously Frank kept his larger monitors outside, so it wasn't like all of Varanus, it maybe just the Odatria, the smaller ones. But so I don't know. And looking at, who's the guy that just took over that farm in Indonesia that is doing a lot of the Chris Applin. He's kind of a monitor nut, and he's like I keep seeing posts of him collecting eggs from Varanus Beccari, the black tree monitor, and green tree monitor, all sorts of tree monitors and larger monitors. He's seems to be, either coming into a good thing or doing very well with this. And I saw him working on a bunch of nest boxes, like out of these big bamboo poles or whatever. He was making sections and collecting eggs out of these bamboo nest boxes that he was building. So, you still have to figure out how to, collect the eggs and probably artificially incubate them and things like that. So if you're artificially incubating eggs, I don't necessarily think of that as farming. I would think of like, I had a friend down in Salt Lake City that would keep Russian tortoises outside, and every spring he'd go out and have little babies crawling around in his yard. And it's like, okay, so he doesn't have to really do anything for that. They just kind of nest in the ground, the babies pop out, and he collects them and sells a few of them or something. So it's, that to me is more of a true farming. But I don't think there's many instances of that in herpetoculture, where you just go out and collect babies, when the time is right or whatever in the spring. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the thing that when you were talking about the stuff Chris Applin's doing and how he's artificially incubating outside of where he's keeping the animals, right? Part of that is probably desire for control. The other part of it is the ability to recreate the particular microhabitat that's required to successfully incubate. And maybe it's possible to get them to lay a clutch in an area that wouldn't. I would say in the monitor context that, I think that's harder there than it is with most other things in terms of getting them to successfully deposit those eggs. That's probably, that's not nothing for sure.
Yeah.
Getting successful nesting on them so that they can be hatched, that is not nothing. At the same time, right, the Russian tortoise example that you're providing right there, the microhabitat exists within the environment that's being provided to at least hatch some of them, right? Yeah. So that does make some sense. So part of it on the one hand, right, it's, are we providing them essentially, are we just putting a cage around nature and then seeing how they do in that? And, on the other hand, it's saying, okay, well, it's definitely not putting a cage around nature. We have a cage that's in nature. And so it's, Helios, we have access to the sun for better and worse, in the outdoor climatic conditions and things, but that doesn't necessarily mean, that it's those. Again, I think it goes back to the sliding scale. The other thing that jumped to mind as we were talking through that is saying, like, just the thermo and food stability based on size, I think really is something to that, right? So that, like, what are the things that probably are most, the generalists that do well as invasive species tend to be larger and more amenable to a varied diet, right? Those things are more likely to do well. And especially if then there aren't particular conditions about how the eggs need to be nested in a certain type of material to successfully hatch. They're not, we don't have shell deterioration associated with, like, oh, they need to be in a acidic, something that's sort of either basic or acidic medium that's sort of leaching some of that calcium out of the shell and
Right.
causing it to be weaker so they can successfully hatch, right? A water monitor or a tegu or a green iguana or what, those things that have shown great resilience to be able to do these things in a variety of conditions tend to be they tend to be generalists that get bigger, right? And so I think that makes them more stable in the environment, more resilient to temperature fluctuations, humidity fluctuations, all those things. They have a greater capacity to do that. So, I think there's something to that part of it too. So that the Odatria more likely to not do well. I would suggest that someone who's doing Agurnia really successfully outside has really, presumably in the context of that's not a cage around nature, that's a cage in nature. That's someone who's watching those animals and really has attuned their captive cage, despite being outside, to the needs of those animals, because they're not what I'm talking about, right? That's a small lizard that's going to require a lot of inputs, and it's easy to overdo it, particularly with heat, cold, wet and cold, especially, those, not that Southern California, depending where you're at, right? There's more or less of a risk of that, right? But
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think, we think, it's hot in Las Vegas and it's hot in Australia, so therefore I can just put anything outdoors that I can. And, Australia, and the Australian species would do great in Vegas, and that's, I think, sometimes we get a little simplistic in our thinking. Now, if all we're doing is harvesting the sun and, a really hot, basking spot, then maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing, and you can utilize the sun for your outdoor caging. But, I guess you could cut a skylight into your, building or something, and or have an indoor cage that has, access to that sunlight and accomplish the same goal. But, you do kind of have that risk of nature. And the other thing that would really scare me about keeping outdoors is like the ants, things like that.
Right. It's one thing to say a raccoon. It's another to say, ants, let alone fire ants, all this stuff. Absolutely.
So
I think you're totally right.
I'm sure that's a continual worry for some outdoor keepers and things like that. I do think that there is a lot of farming aspect in Florida where you can keep stuff, like alligators or turtles or something in an outdoor pond. And then the babies just, hatch, and you might throw some pellets into the pond to feed to kind of
boost try and boost your results.
Yeah. And you might put a hay bale out in the field for the cows to eat, so I do think that there are some aspects, primarily turtle, chelonian rearing that definitely utilize nature and let nature kind of do the work for them. And they incubate in the ground, and people just kind of go out and harvest the babies when they show up. So, definitely there are some aspects in herpetoculture that are farming related. But I think with the snakes and lizard species, those are probably less common, other than maybe the invasives. I think of young farmer Ron out collecting anolis, the big Cuban anoles or night anoles in the trees and stuff. And that's some pretty interesting stories that he's got, finding different species there. And then he'd run them to the animal dealers and sell them wholesale to them, So there's definitely some, and I think people continue with the tegus and things like that. So
absolutely.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Bless you.
Couldn't get to the mute button fast enough.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But I guess you wonder sometimes, because it seems like, people are intentionally releasing some species so they can have them become established and then just go collect from the wild, the tegus,
I think we can call that farming. How about that?
Exactly.
We'll definitively call that, panther chameleons.
Jacksons, the Vales, chameleons, Jacksons, that are just, and I mean, some are more destructive than others. Like the chameleons are kind of, they don't really disperse very widely. They're kind of in a small area, and they, most of them are on private land, so you might get shot trying to go check them out in the wild. I've heard stories of that. So But things like tegus are horribly, and iguanas are a big problem down in Florida, and give, reptile people a bad name. And, obviously there's certain places that are, maybe more offenders than others. And I've heard you can go down like, by the Strictly area
Sure.
and find all sorts of different species that, I don't know. So
They were
I
half
think
dead, so they threw them in the trash can, and they bounced back.
exactly.
Helped
Yeah.
them out, and
Yeah.
they made it through.
Uh-huh. And, I think reptiles are pretty tough when they have what they need, so, yeah. The other thing, and I don't even know if this goes to, what side, probably goes more to your side, but I think about, like my yard with grasshoppers and stuff like that. You would have to be pretty sure that your neighbors weren't spraying for
Sure.
spraying the insects and stuff like that, because or that the grasshoppers don't have a huge intestinal worm in them, because I've seen a few dead
I've seen some of that
grasshoppers
too,
with
and
some big
I do
parasites.
feed.
So.
Yeah, I will catch and I only have one thing that takes them or whatever, but
Yeah.
I do feed those out, and I have been for a decade, and he does great despite urban living and whatever, and knowing that like even historically where I am, that I saw it in the garage, right? There is all sorts of poisons in the garage and whatever, and he's still so who knows what the half-life and turnover is on that stuff even, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I've seen what you're talking about, some of those gnarly worms coming out of dead grasshoppers. That's something.
Yeah. So I mean that ties in more with farming, I think, than herpetoculture.
Right?
You're having to worm your farmed offspring or something because they're eating
Maybe
wild insects that might have parasites or something. So and it's hard to say whether or not parasites in our local grasshoppers would constitute
even
translate into parasites for a reptile. And I mean, obviously, I think Dustin's post really fascinated me when they found that the rat snake, the with
the
ticks,
subocularis, the transficus rat snake,
the ticks
that is specific to that species of snake, and really the tail of that specific snake.
There's
it's
like
pretty
this
wild.
It's almost like they're turning into a rattlesnake, or pine cone at the end of their tail or something. Maybe that's how the spider tail viper got no,
right?
It just merged with a spider. But kind of really an interesting thing, but you're probably not gonna get those same tail ticks on any other species in the area because they're specific for subox. So kind of a crazy little dynamic, and a lot of parasite life cycles are like that, and sometimes they need two natural hosts, and they go through all these different stages. It's
incredible. A bird then into the absolutely.
Or a cow eats it and poops it out, and then a lizard gets it, what the heck, how did that even
and then the bird gets it from the lizard, and then the bird defecates and it's back into the cow food, exactly.
It's incredible, some of those life cycles of parasites. If you haven't heard of that or seen that, look into that, because there's some crazy parasite life cycles, tapeworms and others, or other sort of intestinal worms and parasites. So pretty fascinating. But I guess there's a lot of things that would give me pause trying to farm reptiles. I guess the idea of it's easy to just release something, release a bunch of something and then go back and collect it, but the ecological damage, that kind of thing, if you were looking to make cane toad purses or wallets or whatever, and that was your goal in releasing them in Australia, you'd have a pretty good business model. But the cost of that is
massive.
Incalculable. It's insane. And to think about, it's the stuff of dreams to think about going and herping Australia before the advent of the cane toad, and seeing all the big monitor lizards up in the Northern Territory or Cairns or whatever. So
it does. I mean, so part of the interesting things to that book, Venom, that I think we talked about this before. I know I've talked about it someplace before. That's basically talking about coastal taipan, the development of taipan antivenom. I know in there it really gives a history in terms of something that we've had sort of, to me, the history of cane toads in Australia in terms of the problem that we have now. It was really interesting to get more granularity around what that actually looked like, what the years were, where it was, those different sorts of things, and to have a sense for scale now, so that like it's not like they morph out and they inexorably march, in a particular direction of the, that is otherwise absent cane toads, at this point. So that was super interesting to see sort of the time scale that we're talking about there. I'd have to re-pull it up, but I believe we're talking about like the mid-20s. So like basically 100 years ago now to see the scale that we're at this point. So yeah, super interesting, and sort of who was that making that decision? Why did they make that decision? All those things, it goes into pretty good granularity on that. And it's super interesting. The part that I was jumping to from where that was actually, I think in the areas now, it seems like there's probably this 20 to 30 year period of novelty, right? And they're trying to shorten that in areas where they're just reaching by trying to expose, non-lethally expose them, right? The predators, the medium to large monitors and things, giving them sublethal doses, little ones, giving them a distaste for them. But that being said, I kind of wonder, there are still monitors around cans, who knows, what it would have looked like, relatively speaking. So it's kind of becomes this question of like, okay, we're really seeing this impact, and I'm not denying that at all, but it's saying, okay, maybe actually there's a natural bounce back, right? That's sort of how nature tends to work, is it's, there's a strong force and there's an oppositional force that usually, unless it just totally annihilated it, there's usually an oppositional force. So hopefully, maybe I'm just trying to be positive and say that like, the MT maybe is on the rebound from that, where maybe the eastern side of WA is in for it a little bit.
Yeah, that's what makes me worry. I'd like to get in and see the rough scales before, just in case the cane toads
and that's
have
so
a
limited
negative impact. So that's the struggle, I guess. And I mean, you think about all the millions and millions of dollars that have been sunk into research on cane toads, and an ounce of prevention, a little critical thinking on that project could have, avoided all this. But
it didn't sound like the groups that were making those decisions were doing much critical thinking, with all due respect, with all due respect.
Well, and I mean, it's easy to look back and say, oh, what a stupid thing, how dare you make that mistake? But who would have called the long-term consequences of that action? You probably just think, oh, if they don't eat the cane beetles, they'll die, and they won't, they'll just disappear. And maybe they did put in some critical thought, but it's easy to condemn them now, but it is 100 years ago, and we have the benefit of the knowledge of today, and so that's a little maybe unfair, but at the same time, it's like, what were you thinking? Beetles up high, cane toads down low. How are you thinking this is going to help?
I don't even like the beetles. I think maybe the part hearing about it that pulls me back, because generally speaking, I'm totally with that perspective. I think certainly maybe I was just persuaded by the text. But it sounds like we weren't even talking about scientists. This was sort of politicians going for a quote easy win that then a century later is still totally has devastated literally millions of animals, native wildlife in Australia at this point. Yeah. But I mean, rabbits, same deal, right? And that was more just release pets and heck, maybe we'll see a camel.
Cats.
And
camels, I saw tracks. I never saw the camels, but they're out there, they're around. So and I mean, as far as environmental destructive, there's some aspects of them that are bad, but for the most part, they seem to be maybe somewhat innocuous, compared to
not as bad
cats
as
or cane toads.
Certainly cats, right? That's the number one. Cats,
and really, I mean, I'm sorry, cat lovers, but like, if you want a cat, move to somewhere that's, well, I don't know if there's many places that are great for cats, because cats are just such good predators. It's kind of crazy to think of that, but
Oh
I don't
boy,
know.
you're really
Yeah,
pushing us out here now. I
that's
was
true.
about to
That's
say
true.
something.
We've
Let's
gone far
we'll pull it
afield
back.
of, of
Yeah, we'll
farming.
pull
Yeah.
it back.
But, you know, I think, I guess that's kind of the consequence of this idea that, oh, I can just put something into the environment that will be supported here. And, you know, I mean, that wouldn't be maybe the worst thing in the world if, you know, there was a population of Russian tortoises breeding and, you know, surviving in Utah somewhere, but at the same time they don't belong there, so it
Right.
is not the best thing, and wouldn't be a great thing to have, you know. So I don't know. I as much as I would love to see like a big monitor lizard strolling through the desert of, you know, Las Vegas, it would be not a good thing to have those there, and they don't belong there, and they're not part of the, you know, the ecological system. So I don't know. I mean, Florida is kind of beyond wrecked. It's kind of a
More
free
ways
for
than
all
one.
down there. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, not least of all is the environmental destruction. You
Yeah,
know, you
exactly.
mentioned
Exactly.
you know, cane toads and whether or not we'd see big monitor lizards if it weren't for the cane toads. But who knows? Maybe all the um, development and
Right.
agriculture and things like that would have driven them out anyway. So, you know, there you can probably still see them in primary rainforest and things like that, but yeah, otherwise it might be slim pickings. Although there are some more adaptable than others, and they might be okay in a urban environment. But you know, it's definitely a tricky and complex thing to think about. So I guess the main point is don't release things in the with the intention of collecting their offspring down the road to make a buck, you know, at the
Absolutely.
wholesalers. Yeah, that's not a great model, definitely, of farming of reptiles. So and frankly, I mean, I think cows are a horrible thing to farm in America. You know, why didn't we just farm bison or something? You know, adapt a
Right.
bison to be a little less cantankerous, a little more manageable, and you know, farm bison. They live in the environment anyway, and they don't you don't have to clear cut forest for them. You know, they could just run through the well, there's not much land in the Great Plains either. It's all farmland. So you wouldn't want buffalo running through your farmland either. It's a tricky balance, you know. That's I guess the main thing here. But, wow. Well, any other we exhaust I mean there's obviously lots of different
Yeah, so
aspects,
many
and
aspects
I
to this.
think we're hitting on
Yeah.
some ones that maybe we haven't really talked about before, and you know, and hopefully
Yeah,
this
we
is
definitely said some new stuff.
yeah,
Absolutely. You know,
yeah,
I think yeah, we were in old ground, but we've carved new paths through it,
yeah,
you know,
hmm
new neural networks and things. So
yeah,
hopefully I think that's sort of the idea here, you know, on
yep,
sort of our short shows or whatever with
hmm
is really to toss out ideas. So if people have feedback, that's great. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
feedback or this prompts other ideas or hey, let's talk about, you know, whatever it might be. Is
yeah,
Rob crazy when he's talking about the things that do well or tend to be bigger or whatever, right?
yeah,
Maybe that's the downside of keeping or working in captivity with bigger reptiles is they're
hmm
more if they're out, they're more likely to be a problem, this sort of thing. So
yeah. I mean, you look at sulcatas and they just bulldoze through
yeah.
just about anything. You have to have a pretty intensive fence system to keep them in anywhere, you know. So and I mean, again, like your tortoise gets loose and somebody runs into it, or you at fault, you know, for that damage to their vehicle or for whatever happens. So
Oh
that's
God, don't even put that in Owen's mind.
I know,
Even as
right?
an insurance man, I don't think he's
Uh-huh.
thought that one through.
Well, you know, we were talking about horses at one of the, I think at our faculty retreat or whatever, and you know, this guy, his father-in-law had horses, and they got loose, and a car hit into one, and then sued the farmer because his horse shouldn't be on the road; it should be in, you know, in a fence, and so you know who if you're hitting a horse, I could understand both sides of that. Like the farmer's like, hey, I didn't release him. He got
Right.
loose. And so there's that dynamic of it too, where, you
Negligence versus act of God. Yes.
exactly. And I guess if you could go back and figure out who released that Burmese python into the Everglades, that angry, gravid female, maybe you
Right.
could hold them accountable. I mean, they do that for forest fires that cause a bunch of damage.
Yeah.
But again, you don't know what's going to happen over the next 30 years. You can't just predict that, I guess. So, well, hopefully Keith is smiling right now and we hit on some of the things that he wanted us to cover. And if not, he can let us know and we can get him on here, or he can set us in a better direction down the road. But it's I think trying to tease out different aspects of these topics is really a part of the fun too, and getting different guests on to talk about those things. So yeah, we'll have some more guests soon, and we'll get some more people on. I think we both get busy, and it's, oh yeah, we got to record this week and scramble to get a show together or something. But I think it turns out okay.
Ad hoc things are better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Give you something to listen to on your commute, or if it sucks, let us know too. Like, what are you guys doing? Come on. And then you can come on and show us how it's done.
Exactly right.
Yeah. But I don't know, anything cool in herpetoculture that you've seen lately, or
Yeah, so I've been really digging. There's an Instagram account that I think is called NJ Herping, again with the New Jersey focus. That man, seems like he's turning up a lot of really cool Pine Barrens critters and things. So that's pretty cool. That's something that jumped out to me. And then, stoked on Australia. So now we finally have reached the point where that's sort of the trip focus. It was one, I think, in terms of planning and things, it's one thing when there's one trip that we're focused on, we bought the tickets 8 months in advance and all these things, and looking at it, and that becomes the focal point, so that by the time the trip comes, I'm actually over it. And it requires the excitement and success of it happening to make me reinvest. This year we've been going, so it's I'm just kind of now really super digging into the Australia stuff. I think part of that is a reflection on the fact that having been there and had success before, I feel pretty comfortable. It's re-looking at, it's not learning, it's not initial exposure, so I think that's part of it too. But I mean, the NT is very cool. Maybe I know we won't permanently change your mind off of WA as the place, but like, in my opinion, the NT is certainly my favorite Australian state / territory.
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, we can't do worse than that. My first trip to the Darwin, because that was fraught with all the
book
outside book stuff and that stress and that, madness, basically, that took a lot of time and energy and just really, kind of ended ended on a sour note. So, I'm very excited to get back there and actually do some real herping in Kakadu, where, we were there for a day. So, what are you going to do in a day? And most of it was driving, so and some pretty hairy driving at night, because, driving back from Kakadu to Darwin, and there's just, certain macropods jumping across the road here left and right, and you're trying to dodge little jumping kangaroos and wallabies and stuff. So that was a little intense too. So, but yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to getting back out there and spending more time in, that area, the escarpment land.
In the habitat.
It's fantastic. And I really want to, I don't know if I can improve my endurance, but I want to, spend as much time herping as possible and as little time, sleeping or driving or whatever, that's the goal, is to just keep going, power, maximize and see stuff. So, and I'm planning when I'm on my own, I'm planning, if I see something, I'm just going to sit and watch it, and just enjoy it, take it in, sleep on the trail or something next to it. Right. I don't know, like, just enjoy it, So I'm definitely looking forward to getting back out there. It's exciting. But yeah, I haven't seen a lot of Australian focused stuff. Like, I haven't heard many episodes coming out from the Australian Herpetoculture podcast and stuff like that. So I'm kind of missing that a little bit, and wanting to hear some Australian reptile chatter.
Right.
So
That would be good.
yeah. Well, I guess we'll thank the Morelia Python Radio Network and Eric and Owen for all they do, and letting us have a place in their little podcast umbrella. So we enjoy those guys, and I don't know. I enjoyed listening to Carpets and Coffee yesterday, or when is when with podcasts, but it's always fun to hear those guys chat and talk about things. But so check them out. Check if you're listening to this, you probably already listened to them, but I guess I've been on I don't know. I keep thinking, people remember, if they see this podcast, they know who we are, but maybe if you don't know, you can check out my website, australianaddiction.com. I had somebody go on there and saying, hey, I was looking at your available page and I see some stuff from 2015. I'm like, well, no, my available page should have been updated. I mean, I know I updated it in 2024 at some point. And so I'm like, oh, that's weird. I don't know how you got there, but maybe a search is not the best way. But if you go to australianaddiction.com, unless you have your cookies set back from 2015, you should see current stuff there. And then JG Julander on Instagram, YouTube, Justin Julander on Facebook. But I guess if you're into reptile stuff, look at my Instagram, because that's the stuff that goes over to Facebook anyway. And where can people find you, Rob?
High Plains Herp on Instagram, and rhinorats.com, highplainsherp.com sends you to the same place, just different URLs to go to the same place, which is mostly the I need to make some additions based on it. Maybe it's sort of a winter project, but basically that's right. Just, wild herp photos that don't get made to look like I drew them with a crayon, if they're posted on Instagram or on Facebook, where it's like, I promise that's a way more compelling photo, but it doesn't just crush them out. But I need to add some new stuff there, whatever, but check it out. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll catch you again next time for Reptile Fight Club. Peace out. Fight Club.